I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, eyeing my reflection in the full-length mirror. The ivory silk clung to my curves, a perfect fit for tomorrow's wedding. My wedding. The thought still made my stomach flutter with excitement and nerves. "Sophie, you ready to go?" Dylan's voice called from the living room. "Just a minute." I gave myself one last look, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. This was it. The night before our big day, dinner at Dylan's parents' house with both our families, a chance to bask in the love and support of those closest to us. I stepped out of the bedroom to find Dylan adjusting his tie. He looked handsome in his navy suit, his dark hair neatly combed. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. "Wow," he breathed, "you look stunning." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. Even after 3 years together, his compliments still made me feel like a schoolgirl with a crush. "Thanks. You don't look so bad yourself." Dylan pulled me close, planting a soft kiss on my lips. "Ready to face the family circus?" I laughed, grateful for his humor, as ready as I'll ever be. As we headed for the door, Dylan's phone buzzed on the side table. He glanced at it, a flicker of something, worry, annoyance, crossing his face. "Everything okay?" I asked. He pocketed the phone quickly. "Yeah, just work stuff, nothing important." I nodded, pushing aside a nagging feeling. Dylan had been working late a lot recently, claiming a big project was keeping him busy. But tonight was about us, about family. I wouldn't let work worries intrude. The drive to his parents' house was filled with easy chatter about last-minute wedding details. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw my sister Teresa's car already parked. "Looks like we're the last to arrive," Dylan said, killing the engine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I loved my family. I truly did. But gatherings like this always left me feeling less than, especially with Teresa around. My older sister had always been the golden child, effortlessly charming and beautiful. Next to her, I often felt invisible. Dylan squeezed my hand. "Hey, you okay?" I forced a smile. "Of course. Let's go in." The moment we stepped through the door, we were engulfed in a whirlwind of hugs and exclamations. Dylan's mom, Harriet, pulled me into a warm embrace. "Oh, Sophie, dear, you look lovely," she gushed. "Thanks, Harriet. Something smells amazing," I said, catching a whiff of roast chicken. "That would be my famous herb-roasted chicken," she beamed. "Dylan's favorite." From the corner of my eye, I saw Teresa saunter over. She looked stunning as always in a form-fitting red dress, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. "Little sis," she exclaimed, air-kissing my cheeks. "That dress is darling on you. I'm so glad you took my advice about the neckline." I bristled inwardly at her backhanded compliment but plastered on a smile. "Thanks, Teresa. You look great, too." As everyone moved to the dining room, I noticed Dylan hanging back, fiddling with his phone again. When he saw me watching, he quickly pocketed it and flashed a smile. "Everything okay?" I asked again. "Of course," he said, a little too brightly, just making sure I turned off notifications. "Tonight's all about family, right?" I nodded, but that nagging feeling was back, stronger now. As we took our seats at the table, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Dinner progressed with the usual mix of reminiscing, gentle teasing, and wedding talk. I tried to focus on the conversation, on the warmth of family gathered together, but my mind kept drifting to Dylan's strange behavior. As Harriet cleared the plates for dessert, Dylan excused himself to use the bathroom. His phone, left on the table, buzzed with an incoming text. Before I could stop myself, I glanced at the screen. My heart stopped. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, our special day. Love, T." T. Teresa? In that moment, my world tilted on its axis. The chatter around me faded to a dull roar, as one thought blazed through my mind. What have I stumbled into? I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white as I struggled to process what I'd just seen. The text message from Teresa to Dylan burned in my mind, mocking everything I thought I knew about my relationship, my family, my life. "Sophie, are you all right, dear?" My mother's voice cut through the fog of shock. "You look pale." I forced a smile, my heart hammering. "I'm fine, Mom, just a bit overwhelmed with all the wedding excitement, I guess." Dylan returned, sliding into his seat beside me. His hand found mine under the table, a gesture that used to comfort me. Now it made my skin crawl. "Everything okay, babe?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could he sit there playing the doting fiancé when he was betraying me with my own sister? As dessert was served, I watched Dylan and Teresa like a hawk. The little glances, the way Teresa's laugh seemed to linger a beat too long at Dylan's jokes. How had I been so blind? "So, Teresa," my father boomed, "any prospects on the horizon for you? Can't let your little sister beat you to the altar, can you?" Teresa's tinkling laugh grated on my nerves. "Oh, Daddy, you know me. I'm just having too much fun to settle down." "That's our Teresa," Mom chimed in, her voice warm with pride. "Always the life of the party." I bit back a bitter retort. Of course, perfect Teresa could do no wrong, even if she was stealing her sister's fiancé. As the evening wore on, I felt like I was suffocating. Every loving glance from Dylan, every casual touch from Teresa, it all felt like a cruel charade. Finally, as we were saying our goodbyes, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed air, needed space to think. "I'm just going to step outside for a moment," I mumbled, slipping away from the group. The cool night air hit my face as I stumbled onto the porch, gulping in deep breaths. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. How long had this been going on? Was our entire relationship a lie? Sophie? Teresa's voice made me stiffen. "Are you okay? You've been acting strange all night." I turned to face her, searching her features for any sign of guilt or remorse. But all I saw was the same confident, beautiful sister I'd always known and always felt inferior to. "I'm fine," I said, my voice tight. "Just wedding jitters, I guess." Teresa's laugh was light, carefree. "Oh, sweetie, there's nothing to worry about. Dylan adores you. You two are perfect together." The irony of her words hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth, ready to confront her, to demand the truth. But at that moment, Dylan appeared in the doorway. "There you are," he said, smiling at us both. "Ready to head home, Sophie?" I looked between them, these two people I thought I knew so well. The betrayal cut deep, but a new emotion was rising within me. Anger. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I think I'll stay and help your mom clean up, Dylan. Why don't you give Teresa a ride home? I'm sure you two have plenty to talk about." A flicker of panic crossed Dylan's face, quickly masked. "Are you sure? It's no trouble to wait." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Go on. I'll see you at home." As I watched them leave together, a plan began to form in my mind. They thought they could play me for a fool, but they had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow wasn't going to be the wedding day they expected. Not by a long shot. I turned back to the house, a grim smile on my face. It was time to start gathering evidence. The truth would come out, and when it did, I'd make sure everyone knew exactly who Teresa and Dylan really were. Let the games begin. I paced our apartment like a caged animal, waiting for Dylan to return. My mind raced with all the things I wanted to say, all the accusations I needed to hurl. The clock ticked away the minutes, each one stretching into an eternity. Finally, I heard the key in the lock. Dylan stumbled in, his tie loosened, and a sheepish grin on his face. "Hey, babe," he slurred. "Sorry I'm late. Teresa and I got to talking, and—" "Save it," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut through his drunken haze. "I know everything, Dylan." He blinked, confusion clouding his features. "What are you talking about?" I grabbed his phone from the coffee table, waving it in his face. "I saw the messages, Dylan. I know about you and Teresa." The color drained from his face, replaced by a sickly pallor. "Sophie, I can explain." "Explain what?" I shouted, my composure finally shattering. "Explain how you've been sneaking around with my sister? How you've been lying to me for God knows how long." Dylan reached for me, but I recoiled from his touch. "It's not what you think," he pleaded. "Teresa and I, we just connected. But I love you, Sophie. I want to marry you." His words, meant to soothe, only fueled my anger. "How dare you?" I hissed. "How dare you stand there and claim to love me while you're sleeping with my sister?" "It was a mistake," Dylan insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "A moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything." I laughed bitterly. "A moment of weakness? The text I saw suggested otherwise. This isn't just a fling, is it? You two have been planning something." Dylan's face contorted, a mix of guilt and frustration. "You don't understand. Teresa, she's different. She gets me in a way you never could." The words hit me like a physical blow. All the years of feeling second best to Teresa came rushing back, a tidal wave of insecurity and pain. "Get out," I whispered, my voice trembling with rage and hurt. "Sophie, please." Get out! I screamed, grabbing the nearest object, a framed photo of us, and hurling it at him. It shattered against the wall, a fitting metaphor for our relationship. Dylan stumbled back, shock written across his face. You're overreacting. We can work this out. Think about the wedding, about our families. Our families? I laughed hysterically. You mean the family that's always favored Teresa? The family that's going to side with her, just like they always have? As the words left my mouth, a chilling realization washed over me. They would side with Teresa. My parents, our friends, they'd all believe her version of events. Sweet, perfect Teresa, who could do no wrong. Dylan must have seen the change in my expression because he stepped forward, his voice taking on a manipulative tone. See? You know I'm right. We can get past this, Sophie. For the sake of our families, for our future. Don't throw it all away over a misunderstanding. For a moment I wavered. The thought of facing everyone, of admitting that once again Teresa had bested me, was almost too much to bear. But then I remembered the text, the secret smiles, the years of lies. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We're done, Dylan. The wedding's off. I yanked my engagement ring off, flinging it at his feet. Tell Teresa she can have you. You deserve each other. Dylan's face darkened. You'll regret this, Sophie. You're nothing without me, without your family. Who's going to believe you over Teresa? His words meant to wound, ignited something in me. A fierce determination I didn't know I possessed. Get out, I said one last time, my voice cold and hard, and tell Teresa to watch her back. This isn't over. As the door slammed behind him, I sank to the floor, tears finally breaking free. But beneath the sorrow, a plan was forming. They thought they could walk all over me, that I'd just roll over and take it like always. Not this time. This time I was going to fight back. And God help anyone who stood in my way. I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, a single suitcase at my feet. The bare walls and empty rooms echoed with possibility and loneliness. This wasn't how I'd imagined starting my new life, but here I was, 35 and starting over. A gentle knock startled me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair. Hello, dear. I'm Clara from next door. I saw you moving in and thought you might like some company. And some homemade lasagna. I felt tears prick my eyes at this simple act of kindness. That's so thoughtful. I'm Sophie. Please come in. As we sat at my makeshift dining table, a cardboard box, Clara's warmth drew out my story. I found myself pouring out everything. Dylan's betrayal, Teresa's manipulation, my family's blind spots. Clara listened intently, her weathered hand covering mine. Oh, honey, you've been through the ringer, but you're stronger than you know. Her words were a balm to my battered spirit. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Now, Clara said, her eyes twinkling, tell me about this sister of yours. Has she always been the favorite? The question transported me back to childhood memories I'd long suppressed. Teresa, golden and perfect, always the center of attention. Me forever in her shadow. I remember when I was 10, I began, the words tumbling out. I'd worked for weeks on a science project. The night before the fair, Teresa knocked it over accidentally. Instead of being upset, my parents praised her for helping me rebuild it. She got all the credit at the fair. Clara shook her head. Some people thrive on that kind of attention, even if it means stepping on others. That's Teresa in a nutshell, I agreed. But stealing my fiancé, that's a new low, even for her. A determined glint appeared in Clara's eye. Well, it's high time you stood up for yourself, Sophie. Have you considered digging deeper into Teresa's past? People like that often leave a trail of destruction. Her suggestion sparked something in me. I grabbed my laptop, fingers flying over the keys as I searched social media, old news articles, anything I could find about Teresa. What I uncovered left me reeling. Teresa's perfect life was anything but. There were hints of affairs, suspicious job changes, even a restraining order from an ex-boyfriend. But the most shocking discovery was a series of posts from my cousin Megan, dated 3 years ago. I can't believe Teresa would stoop so low, Megan had written. Stealing your sister's boyfriend is one thing, but marrying him? Sophie deserves to know the truth. My hands shook as I pieced it together. 3 years ago, I'd been dating Mark. We'd been serious, talking about a future together. Then, suddenly, he'd broken things off. Months later, Teresa had introduced her new husband, Mark, to the family. I'd been devastated but had eventually moved on, meeting Dylan. Now history was repeating itself. "Oh my God," I whispered, showing Clara the posts. "She's done this before. She stole my boyfriend, married him, and I never knew." Clara's face hardened. "That's beyond sibling rivalry, Sophie. That's calculated cruelty." A cold determination settled over me. I need to confront her. Both of them. They can't keep getting away with this. "Be careful," Clara warned. "People like that can be dangerous when cornered. You need a plan." I nodded, my mind already racing. "You're right. I can't just rush in. I need to be smart about this." As the sun set outside my new apartment, Clara and I began to strategize. For the first time since discovering Dylan's betrayal, I felt a sense of purpose. "Teresa thinks she's won," I said, a steely edge to my voice. "But she has no idea what's coming. This ends now." Clara squeezed my hand. "That's the spirit, dear. Show them who you really are." As Clara left, promising to check in tomorrow, I stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. I was done being the victim. Done letting Teresa and others like her walk all over me. It was time to fight back. And this time, I wouldn't stop until the truth was exposed, no matter the cost. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by a web of papers, sticky notes, and my laptop. Clara's words echoed in my mind. Be smart about this. For days I'd been piecing to Teresa's past, uncovering a pattern of deception that made my blood boil. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Angie, my best friend, her face etched with concern. "Sophie, I came as soon as I could. What's going on? Your texts were cryptic." I ushered her in, grateful for her presence. "Angie, you're not going to believe what I've discovered." Over the next hour, I laid out everything. Dylan's betrayal, Teresa's history of stealing boyfriends, and my plan to expose them both. Angie's eyes widened. "Sophie, this is intense. Are you sure you want to go through with this? It could tear your family apart." I felt a flicker of doubt, but pushed it aside. They tore the family apart when they betrayed me. Twice. I'm just bringing the truth to light. Angie nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm with you. What's the plan?" I pulled out a detailed timeline I'd created. "There's a family reunion next month at Dylan's parents' house. Everyone will be there. I'm going to expose them in front of everyone." As I explained my strategy, involving carefully gathered evidence and timed revelations, Angie's expression shifted from concern to admiration. "You've really thought this through," she said. "But Sophie, what about after? Have you considered the fallout?" I hesitated. The truth was, I hadn't thought much beyond the moment of exposure. The idea of facing my family, of dealing with the aftermath, made my stomach churn. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Clara poked her head in, a plate of cookies in hand. "I thought you girls might need some sustenance for your planning session." As Clara settled in, bringing her wisdom to our discussion, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Sophie, we need to talk. Your father and I are worried about you. Teresa says you've been making wild accusations. Please come home so we can sort this out." I showed the text to Angie and Clara, my hands shaking. "See, they're already taking her side. They always do." Clara patted my hand. "Remember, dear, this isn't just about your family anymore. It's about standing up for yourself." Angie nodded in agreement. "She's right, Soph. You can't back down now." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "You're both right. I'm going to respond, but not the way they expect." I typed out a reply. "Mom, I'll be there. But be prepared. There's a lot you don't know, and it's time for the truth to come out." As I hit send, a wave of determination washed over me. "This ends now," I said, my voice steady. "I'm going to Dylan's parents' house tomorrow. I can't wait for the reunion. They need to know what kind of person their son really is." Clara's eyes widened. "Are you sure that's wise, dear? Going into the lion's den unprepared?" I nodded, a plan already forming. "I'm more prepared than they could ever imagine. Angie, can you come with me? I could use the support." Angie squeezed my hand. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it." As we finalized the details, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. Tomorrow, I would confront not just Dylan and Teresa, but years of being overlooked and undervalued. Clara hugged me tightly before leaving. "Remember, Sophie, the truth is your armor. Wear it proudly." That night, as I lay in bed, I imagined all the possible outcomes of tomorrow's confrontation. But one thing was certain. Win or lose, I was done being a doormat. Tomorrow, I would reclaim my voice, my dignity, and my future. As dawn broke, I rose, determination coursing through my veins. Today was the day everything would change. I only hoped I was ready for whatever came next. My heart pounded as Angie and I approached Dylan's parents' house. The familiar driveway, once a symbol of family and belonging, now felt like enemy territory. I clutched my folder of evidence, my lifeline in the storm I was about to unleash. "You ready for this?" Angie whispered, squeezing my hand. I nodded, steeling myself, as ready as I'll ever be. The door opened before we could knock, revealing Dylan's mother, Harriet. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Sophie, we weren't expecting you. Is everything all right?" "No, Harriet, it's not," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But it will be once the truth comes out. Is everyone here?" Confusion clouded her features as she ushered us in. In the living room, I found my worst fears confirmed. Dylan and Teresa sat side by side on the couch, their proximity speaking volumes. My parents were there too, along with Dylan's father, Walter. The room fell silent as I entered. Dylan stood abruptly, his face a mask of panic. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" I ignored him, addressing the room at large. "I'm here because it's time everyone knew the truth, about Dylan, about Teresa, and about the lies that have been tearing this family apart for years." My mother's face paled. "Sophie, what are you talking about? Teresa said you've been making wild accusations." "Of course she did," I cut in, my voice sharp. "Teresa's been manipulating all of you for years, and it stops today." I opened my folder, pulling out printed emails, text messages, and photos. "Did you know that Teresa and Dylan have been having an affair? Not just now, but 3 years ago, when I was dating Mark?" Gasps echoed around the room. Teresa jumped up, her face contorted with rage. "You're lying. How dare you come here and spread these vicious rumors?" But I was done being silenced. I turned to my parents, my voice breaking. "Mom, do you remember when Mark suddenly broke up with me? It wasn't because of work stress like Teresa told you. It was because she seduced him, just like she's done with Dylan." I handed them the evidence, watching as their expressions shifted from disbelief to horror. Dylan's parents looked shell-shocked, staring at their son with newfound disappointment. Dylan made a desperate lunge for the papers, but Angie intercepted him. "Don't even think about it," she warned. I continued, my voice gaining strength. "Teresa, you've always been the favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong. But do you want to know why? Because you've manipulated everyone around you, stealing opportunities, boyfriends, and even husbands to make yourself look better." Teresa's composure cracked. "You don't understand. I never meant to hurt you, Sophie. I couldn't stand seeing you happy when I was so miserable." Her admission hung in the air, heavy with years of resentment and jealousy. I turned to Dylan, my voice ice cold. "And you? You were willing to marry me while carrying on with my sister. How long did you think you could keep this charade going?" Dylan's face crumpled. "Sophie, please, we can work this out. I love you. Save it," I snapped. "Your actions speak louder than your words ever could." As the full weight of the revelations settled over the room, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Years of pent-up emotions and unspoken truths had finally been released. My father, his voice thick with emotion, broke the silence. "Sophie, we had no idea. All these years we thought—" "You thought Teresa could do no wrong," I finished for him, "and that I was just being oversensitive or jealous. Well, now you know the truth." The room erupted into chaos. Accusations flew, tears fell, and years of family dynamics unraveled before my eyes. In the midst of it all, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done it. I had finally stood up for myself. But as I watched my family, both families, grapple with the fallout of my revelations, a new fear gripped me. What would be left when the dust settled? Had I just destroyed the very relationships I had been fighting to save? As Dylan made one last desperate plea and Teresa collapsed into sobs, I realized that this was far from over. The truth was out, but the real battle, the fight to rebuild and heal, was only just beginning. The days following my revelation at Dylan's parents' house were a blur of heated phone calls, tearful confrontations, and sleepless nights. I'd unleashed a tsunami of truth, and now I was struggling to stay afloat in its wake. I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone as it buzzed incessantly with messages from family members and friends. Each notification felt like a fresh wound, reopening the pain of betrayal. A gentle knock at the door startled me. It was Clara, her kind eyes filled with concern. "Sophie, dear, You haven't left your apartment in days. How are you holding up?" I let out a bitter laugh. "How am I holding up? I've torn my family apart, Clara. I thought exposing the truth would make everything better, but it's only made things worse." Clara settled beside me on the couch, her weathered hand covering mine. "The truth often hurts before it heals, Sophie. Give it time." Just then my phone rang. It was my mother. With a deep breath, I answered. "Sophie," her voice was strained, "we need to talk. Can you come over? Your father and I, we owe you an apology." My heart raced as I agreed. An hour later, I found myself standing in my childhood home, facing my parents across the kitchen table. The air was thick with unspoken words and years of misunderstandings. "We had no idea," my father began, his voice heavy with regret. "All these years we thought Teresa was just more outgoing, more successful. We never realized the extent of her manipulation." My mother reached for my hand. "Sophie, can you ever forgive us for being so blind?" Tears welled in my eyes. This was the validation I'd craved for so long, but it felt hollow in the face of everything that had happened. "I don't know," I admitted. "I love you both, but the damage, it's not something that can be fixed overnight." As we talked, years of pent-up emotions poured out. It was painful, but cathartic. For the first time, I felt truly seen by my parents. Our conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. We rushed to the window to see Dylan on the front lawn, looking disheveled and desperate. "Sophie," he called out. "Please, we need to talk. I can explain everything." My father moved to confront him, but I held him back. "No, Dad, I need to handle this myself." I stepped outside, my newfound strength propelling me forward. "There's nothing to explain, Dylan. Your actions spoke louder than any words ever could." Dylan's face crumpled. "But I love you, Sophie. Teresa, she manipulated me, just like she did everyone else. We can still make this work." For a moment, I wavered. The old Sophie, desperate for love and acceptance, wanted to believe him, but then I remembered everything. The lies, the betrayals, the years of being second best. "No, Dylan," I said firmly. "We can't. What you and Teresa did, it's unforgivable. I deserve better than either of you." As I turned to go back inside, I saw Teresa's car pull up. My sister stepped out, her usual poise replaced by genuine remorse. "Sophie, wait," she called out. "I know I've done terrible things, but please, you're my sister. We can't let this destroy our family." I felt a surge of emotions, anger, hurt, and a tiny flicker of love for the sister I once knew. But I stood my ground. "You destroyed our family long ago, Teresa. With every lie, every manipulation, I'm done being your victim." As I walked back into the house, leaving Dylan and Teresa on the lawn, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and liberation. I'd lost my fiancé, my sister, and the family I thought I had. But I'd gained something far more valuable, self-respect and the truth. Inside, my parents waited, their faces a mix of pride and concern. "What now?" my mother asked softly. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the future on my shoulders. "Now we rebuild. If you're willing to try, so am I." As we embraced, I realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and painful truths, but for the first time in my life, I felt ready to face it head-on. The old Sophie was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth and was no longer afraid to claim it. 6 months had passed since that fateful day when I confronted Dylan and Teresa. The wounds were still fresh, but slowly healing. I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, ready to embark on the next chapter of my life. Clara knocked on my open door, a warm smile on her face. "Ready for your housewarming party, dear?" I took a deep breath, nodding. "As ready as I'll ever be." As guests began to arrive, Angie, my parents, even a few colleagues from work, I felt a surge of gratitude. These were the people who had stood by me through the darkest days, helping me rebuild my life piece by piece. My mother hugged me tightly. "Sophie, we're so proud of you," she whispered. "You've shown such strength." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but it was stronger, more honest than ever before. As the party was in full swing, there was another knock at the door. I opened it to find Teresa standing there, looking uncertain. "Sophie, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," she began. I felt a flicker of the old pain, but it was duller now. "Teresa, Please, let me say this," she interrupted. "I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I want you to know how sorry I am, for everything. I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse for the first time. Thank you for saying that, Teresa. I can't forgive you yet, but maybe someday. As Teresa left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was mine to shape. Returning to the party, I found myself drawn into a conversation with Greg, a friend of Angie's I'd met a few weeks ago. His kind eyes and easy laugh made me feel at ease. "So, Sophie," he said, "Angie tells me you're starting your own business?" I nodded, excitement bubbling up. "Yes, a small consulting firm. It's scary but exhilarating." "I know the feeling," Greg replied. "I started my own company a few years ago. It's not easy, but it's worth it." As we talked, I felt a spark of connection. Not the whirlwind romance I'd had with Dylan, but something steadier, more grounded. Later, as the party wound down, Clara pulled me aside. "Sophie, look at you. You're glowing, dear." I smiled, realizing she was right. For the first time in months, I felt truly happy. "I couldn't have done it without you, Clara. Your wisdom, your support, it meant everything." Clara patted my hand. "You had the strength inside you all along, Sophie. You just needed to believe in yourself." As the last guest left, I stood on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. I thought about how far I'd come, from the heartbroken woman who discovered her fiancé's betrayal to the strong, independent person I was today. The road hadn't been easy. There were still days when the pain of betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. But I had learned to face it head-on, to draw strength from the experience rather than let it defeat me. I thought about Teresa, about the long journey of healing that lay ahead for our family. I thought about Dylan, hoping he had learned from his mistakes. And I thought about Greg, wondering if perhaps there was a new chapter waiting to be written there. But most of all, I thought about myself. The Sophie who had emerged from the ashes of betrayal was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever thought possible. As I closed the balcony door and turned back to my new home, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in my life, I was excited to face it. I had lost a fiancé and a sister, but I had gained something far more valuable: self-respect, true friendships, and a deep understanding of my own worth. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning, and I couldn't wait to see what the next chapter would bring.